Hello.
All right. Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for your patience. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Dylan Rodriguez, he, him pronouns. I'm here in my capacity, in part, as co-director of the Center for Ideas in Society, and I'm also here as professor in the Department of Black Study, newly created at UC Riverside, and the Department of Media and Cultural Studies. It's a privilege to welcome all you all to our roundtable conversation today, Abolishing California Prison Slavery Roundtable with formerly incarcerated activists and organizers. I'm really thrilled and privileged to include this conversation as part of the programming stream that I curate at the Center for Ideas in Society titled Decolonizing Humanism, which is co-sponsoring this roundtable with UCR underground scholars and my colleagues at UCR that have started the Health, Humanities, and Disability Justice Initiative. Please know that the event is being recorded for future posting on the Center for Ideas in Society YouTube channel. Captions should be available on your Zoom interface, so please feel free to use that. And I give apologies in advance for not having live sign language interpretation, but the infrastructure at UCR leaves a lot to be desired still. So I'm apologetic for that. Okay, so to kick things off, for those of you who are unfamiliar, many North American universities include boilerplate land acknowledgements in the introduction of their campus events. So I would like to humbly dissent from that practice of acknowledgement by instead offering an urging and a provocation toward activation, mobilization, and collective study and movement against conditions of occupation, anti-Black violence, and coloniality. And I think this is especially important given the topic of today's roundtable and the ongoing genocidal siege and asymmetrical war that's happening in Gaza, waged by Israel with the aid of the United States. So I want to open this occasion by acknowledging Rupert and Jeanette Costo's legacy of reclaiming, protecting, and sustaining Indigenous presence at UC Riverside, including epistemological, archival, and physical forms of Indigenous thought and being. The University of California is a settler colonial institution. It occupies unceded land and ecologies that are continuously inhabited by original and ongoing human caretakers, including the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples on and around the UC Riverside campus. This institution is populated. It is populated, it is inhabited, it is enlivened by Indigenous, Aboriginal, and First Nations peoples from all over the world, many of whom are among faculty, students, and staff. This fact makes it ever more distressing that the University of California has failed to repatriate and return hundreds of thousands of Indigenous and Native peoples' remains and artifacts to their tribes and peoples of origin, despite a decades-long legal mandate and recent incriminating state audit. UC Riverside is blocks away from the site where the Riverside Police Department stole the life of 19-year-old Taisha Miller. I know a bunch of the people in this event remember this. A matter that continually imprints the centrality of anti-Black state violence and extra-state violence to this institution and the surrounding geography. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department, with which UC Riverside has a cooperating police relationship, is regionally and nationally notorious for creating cruel and fatal conditions in local jails for people who are awaiting trial and cannot afford bail. It's a shared responsibility to address how the University of California is actively complicit in long and ongoing histories of anti-Black state and state-condoned violence, especially as university police forces continuously accumulate a record of harassment, intimidation, surveillance, and aggression against profiled, criminalized, and otherwise targeted people and communities. So it's with a sense of obligation, responsibility, and love that I offer these words in place of the so-called land acknowledgement. I'm honored to open our precious time together this morning, this afternoon, this evening, by calling forward new, old, collective, and experimental efforts to create decolonized, abolitionist, and liberated futures. Welcome. To continue my introduction to this event, I again want to thank the co-sponsors of this event, UCR Underground Scholars and the UCR Health, Humanities, and Disability Justice Initiative. This event is part of the Decolonizing Humanism programming stream at the Center for Ideas in Society. I'll put a link up in the chat And if folks are watching this on YouTube, there'll be a link in the comments, in the description of the event as well. Thank you, a special thank you to the students of Media and Cultural Studies 160, Race, State Violence, and Incarceration in the United States, who participated with our roundtablists today in a quarter-long research effort on the topic that is under discussion. With that, I'd like to introduce our roundtablists. Please bear with me. Each of them is, I think, a significant and singular figure in their own right. So I'd like to spend just a moment giving you all the context for how our roundtablists enter the discussion. Geronimo Cuauhtemoc Aguilar is a Chicano indigenous person of Purepecha descent and a policy analyst for legal services for prisoners with children. After completing the 2021 Elder Freeman Policy Fellowship, Geronimo was brought on to the LSPC staff as the organization's policy coordinator. Shortly thereafter, he was promoted to policy analyst midway through 2022, and he has not looked back since. Geronimo's combination of lived experience, system impact by incarceration of many family members, and a propensity for critical thinking and analysis has been a strong addition to legal services for prisoners with children. His background in radical organizing as a former Brown Beret student activist and community organizer has set him up uniquely to always stay rooted in the community, no matter how much time he has to spend with Capitol staff, elected officials, and other stakeholders. And we're going to touch on that, the have to spend part. Geronimo graduated from CSU, Cal State, Sacramento, with a bachelor's degree in ethnic studies with a concentration in Chicano studies. And he's organized on many levels, including city government, county board of supervisors, federal immigration advocacy, and of course, his current focus on California statewide legislation. Geronimo's leadership has included helping found the Abolish Bondage Collectively campaign, ABC, which has led to LSPC's co-sponsorship of ACA 8, the End Slavery in California Act, which we'll be discussing today. He's helped train and launch similar campaigns in Wisconsin, Kentucky, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Missouri through the ABC national apparatus. Geronimo has been quoted and interviewed by the Real News Network, LA Times, Newsbreak, KQED, and writes the monthly policy update section included in the All of Us or None newspaper, which goes into all California prisons. He also authors the policy updates for the monthly e-news newsletter, which is available to our members, to the members of All of Us or None and the public. Welcome, Geronimo. I'm trying to pin you all so folks can start to see your faces as well. Maybe one of y'all can help me do that. I want to welcome Bobby Ebony Butts from All of Us or None and many other places. Bobby Ebony Butts is a resilient mother of 4, dedicated to overcoming her past and forging a successful future for herself and her children. Her journey includes achieving a general equivalent diploma from Chattanooga Community College, Tennessee, shout out Tennessee, and earning a diploma in business office administration from United Education Institute. As a passionate criminal and social justice policy advocate in California, Bobby is at the forefront of transformative change. She actively collaborates with key organizations, fervently advocating for policy reforms that dismantle systemic oppression against individuals with criminal convictions. Bobby's commitment to social impact is evident through her role as a former assistant director for Starting Over Incorporated, where she spearheaded the Family Reunification, Equity, and Empowerment Project. In this capacity, she assisted families in navigating the intricacies of the child welfare system, so-called child welfare system, I should say, working tirelessly to reunify parents with their loved ones in foster care. Bobby's a catalyst for change, contributing to the creation of state law concepts and driving shifts in local policies through initiatives like voter registration, phone banking canvassing, and education outreach. Her dedication extends to various fellowships and programs, including the formerly incarcerated convicted people and families movement, Kravis Lab alumni measuring social impact, Women Organizing for Justice and Opportunity Leadership Lab, and many other organizations and programs. Bobby's contributions have not gone unnoticed, earning her various awards, certificates, and letters of appreciation, including a completion certificate from the Corey Jackson International Institute for Restorative Practices, Assembly Certificate of Recognition from Sabrina Cervantes, County of Riverside Certificate of Recognition from Karen Spiegel, County of LA Commendation from Mark Ridley, Supervisor, 2nd District, Senate Certificate of Recognition from Senator Holly Mitchell, Special Congressional Recognition Member of Congress Karen Bass, Boo, and most importantly, in my view, the Eric Isom Award from Riverside All of Us or None from 2017. Bobby's story is one of resilience, advocacy, and positive change, inspiring others to rise above challenges and actively contribute to the betterment of society. Love you, Bobby. Thank you for coming through. Here's Bobby. All right, y'all. I'd like to welcome Fidel Chagoya, starting over, All of Us or None, and one of the founding members of Underground Scholars. Fidel Chagoya is one of the All of Us or None organizers that comes out of the Riverside chapter. He's a recent graduate from the University of California at Riverside with a BA in sociology, and is currently a grad student at the University of Redlands in the MA in Clinical Mental Health Counseling program. He's been directly impacted by mass incarceration. He has dedicated his life to creating relationships with multiple organizations such as Starting Over Incorporated, Underground Scholars, Family Reunification Equity and Empowerment, Time Done, CAT 911, and many others who work toward educating people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated so they may create their voice to uplift their lived experiences through policy organizing and advocacy. Fidel says if he had a superpower, I think he does have the superpower, it would be electrifying energy to all he encounters. So I can affirm that Fidel's got that superpower. He is a superhero. And I'll also give a shout out to Fidel because he's the person with whom I kind of co-conspired to instigate the quarter-long research project, as well as today's event. So welcome to Fidel. Sean LaFleur, All of Us or None, is an organizer, advocate, and reentry specialist. Sean is a dedicated advocate and organizer who has made it his life's mission to bring about positive change in the criminal justice system and support individuals in their reentry journey. By the way, Sean's too humble to put this in his bio, but he's literally crossing the country constantly trying to do this work. And I want to talk about that in our conversation today, Sean. With a relentless passion for justice and community empowerment, Sean has actively contributed to multiple initiatives on both state and national levels. At present, Sean serves as an organizer for All of Us or None, a grassroots organization committed to ending involuntary servitude and advocating for the rights of marginalized individuals. His work on the state level involves engaging with legislative efforts to put an end to this unjust practice, bringing hope and justice to those affected. I'll say welcome to you, Sean, and let me pin you so people can see your face. There's Sean. Lane May from Starting Over. Lane May is a sophomore at Pitzer College and an intern at Starting Over Incorporated and Riverside All of Us or None. She's a history major. She's a history scholar. Let me tell you that from the conversation we started having this quarter. Lane is a scholar of history with a focus on decolonization, Black politics and resistance, and abolitionist organizing. She draws parallels from her on-campus organizing as a leader of Claremont Students for Justice in Palestine. Shout out SJP. Every SJP chapter is out there. Emerging Faculty for Justice in Palestine chapters finally stepping it up. Shout out to all the Justice in Palestine organizers out there. And Claremont Jewish Voices for Peace into her work as a Riverside All of Us or None intern. Over this past semester, she has been shadowing Fidel and fellow organizers on this panel as they work with the Abolishing Bondage Collectively Coalition, ABC, on the campaign for ACA 8, which we will discuss thoroughly today. Lane has conducted research on ACA 8 with our class, MCS 160, Race, State Violence, and Incarceration in the United States. She has focused on examining takeaways from states that have recently eliminated the exception clause, the slavery exception clause, in order to figure out how it is that those states, despite those eliminations, still struggle to enact material change. And she examines this alongside the carceral reality in California, that those inside California prisons are forced into prison slavery. So welcome to Lane May. Finally, last and certainly, of course, ever and never ever least, love you, Henry. Henry Ortiz, from Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. Henry is a formerly incarcerated senior staff community organizer with All of Us or None Sacramento chapter. While incarcerated, he co-founded Self-Awareness and Recovery in 2005 and wrote the SAR Model of Transformation document to facilitate the healing of multi-generational trauma. I'd love to get to that in our discussion today, Henry. He designed it to develop forgiveness, healing, transformation, and insight into the causative factors of criminal behavior. I should call it criminalized behavior. Henry, I'm reading his bio. Henry expanded the healing curriculum model through his incarcerated peers and organizations like Self-Awareness and Recovery. He has various years of experience teaching evidence-based model programs in prisons, continuation schools, community colleges and universities, county jails, and the community. In the past 3 years since his release from prison, he's been instrumental in advocating to end the killings and mass incarceration of people of color by addressing police violence, ending felony disenfranchisement, and campaigning against systemic racism in California. For the past year, Henry has been working on developing the All of Us or None Sacramento chapter team, as they now have 53 members, 6 staff, 1 volunteer, and an office in South Sacramento. So shout out and welcome to Henry. I'm going to pull you in here, Henry, in just a second. If I can find you. Oh, there you are. What's up, Henry? There you are. Welcome. So folks, thank you for coming through again. An overview of the way we're going to approach today's roundtable. I'm going to ask each of our roundtablists to talk on a specific area that's in their kind of area of organizing, their expertise, and their research. They're going to each talk for briefly, maybe 10 minutes each. And after that, I'll start our discussion with a couple, I promise just a couple questions for our roundtablists. And then from there, we will open the discussion to everybody who's here in attendance. And of course, roundtables, y'all can ask questions to each other, and you can ask questions back to the people that are here in attendance. So from here, I'm going to try to back off a little bit and just serve as a facilitator. And I'm going to ask Henry to start us off with overviews of systems of oppression and introducing the ACA 8 issue. Go ahead, Henry, your mic.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Riverside. I want to thank Riverside, the professor, our boy Fidel. You know, all this evolved just with a great conversation, a great conference. And so I want to thank y'all for your amazing work. I admire and respect the work of Riverside. You guys are in the front lines in the real struggle, as well as with all the stuff that's been happening in the county jails out there with the sheriff, the abuse, with CPS. You know, it don't stop, you know. As y'all know, I work with legal services for children. The bio was a few years outdated. I'm going on 6 years free now, thanks to God. 3 of those off of parole. We have an amazing team that I work for. We just completed 45 years with legal services for prisoners for children, celebrating the legacy of elders like Dorsey Nunn and all our leaders across California, from like Homies Unidos, Barrios Unidos, that make up the whole network of All of Us or None across California, New Way of Life. OGs right there, always. And so in saying all that, today we want to talk about the impact that these systems have been causing on us. And for me, I you know, when I'm organizing, you know, part of my work is policy work, right? You know, I'm there just to make sure somebody fumbles the ball, boom, I make sure we shut it down, whether it's showing up, advocating, organizing, you know, local chapter folks to show up, or either doing press conferences and calling out these oppressors or the sheriffs that cause our community harm, right? And so and doing a lot of that work and organizing. I'm also helping families impacted by incarceration, and of course the incarcerated. We help people prepare for coming home. You know, we assist them in getting their life together out here. And there's so many different things that happen. You know, people getting evictions, or people not getting jobs because they've been locked up over 30 years. So there's over 40,000 barriers that we have because we will continue having because of our criminal convictions. And that's why we fight hard. That's why we change laws that are going to not only change things for our people across California, but across the country. And one of those movements and campaigns that we're pushing is ACA 8, which is to get rid of involuntary servitude, which is prison slave labor, the legalized practice that they put in the Constitution in California, to continue paying us at 11 cents an hour starting if you're lower age. And, you know, middle class, 35 cents an hour. If you're upper class, you'd be lucky if you're making 75 to 98. Very few people have those pay numbers, you know? And so on top of that, they take restitution from us, 55%. And they just keep us in this ongoing cycle where they take 30 years of your life, they throw you out to the streets. Now that we're changing all these laws, now that we're doing a lot of resentencing and getting people and circumventing the board, because the prison board is only releasing 30%, and most of them are comprised of biased former law enforcement people that don't give a crap about our people, and that cause our people to relive all the historical trauma that caused them to end up in these predicaments and creating harm in the first place. A lot of these crimes, they're out of poverty and they're out of survival because of the legacy of enslavement that has been instituted in our people. Today, we're going to talk to our team, our research team, you know, and we're going to study different components of slave labor in California. And we're going to allow our lead organizers across California, from All of Us to None, along with the intern team that they were working with, and y'all going to be able to see how dirty this game is. And then there's also some questions that are not being answered, right? A lot of the products that we're producing are being distributed through what's called PIA, Prison Industry Association, or whatever the crap. I can't even remember that acronym right now. They just cause me so much resentment because I see so much harm that they cause. And they're, you know, the layers go on, right? The layers go on, and our people are after being enslaved there for nearly their whole lives, they're kicked out with $200 worth of gate money, you know, with the card. And most of the people don't even know use cards. When I came home, it took me a day and a half almost to learn how to withdraw the gate money they gave me when I paroled to South Central, only to get locked up 5 days later. Them labeling me, saying that I was associating with active gang members, as they put these labels on us to justify giving me a 10-day flash and then kicking me out of the county. You know, and that's why I'm here in Sacramento. I'm here in Sacramento specifically to change laws, because I don't get no peace. I won't be free until all our people are free. And in order to get freedom, in order to get peace, we have to change laws, and we have to educate our people on how to resentence them. And that's what I've been doing lately. We've been resentencing a lot of people. Our network does participatory defense through all our chapters, which is defending people when they confront a case, or some of our people here that fight whenever CPS is trying to take our kids, only to institutionalize into this whole long-term legacy of enslavement. When you look at the juvenile records, most of the kids that were ending up in prison are from foster carers that were kidnapped from CPS. So this is a whole working system. These are all systems of oppression that work in a dynamic that causes harm. And we have no choice but to organize and protect ourselves against these oppressive systems that are trying to take our liberty, our citizenship, our kids, and our freedom. You know, so with that said and done, let's kick it off with our amazing panelists, and I'll throw back the floor to Dylan so he can navigate us to who's next on the agenda.
Right on. Unlike academics, Henry kicked us off by offering a concise and crystallized version of the work, and leaving us wanting more. So appreciate you, Henry. We're gonna hear a lot more from you. I want to pass the baton over to Lane. Lane, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Henry, for that. And hi, everyone. I'm Lane. I'm a student intern at All of Us or None. Thank you for having me, Professor Rodriguez, and for having the opportunity to research with your students. So I would like to share some of my takeaways that I have gathered through my time learning from these beautiful organizers, and my research I've done on the California's carceral history. First, I'm going to just put some resources in the chat that I think are really important, that you can look up later. So before one can grasp the significance of ACAA as a step towards the abolition of modern-day slavery, one has to understand California's carceral history. While many believe California joined the Union as a free state, the ACAA project reveals California's entanglement with slavery from its beginning. All of Us or None has documented the legacy of slavery within California, spanning from the mission systems that exploited and abused the indigenous people to the enslavement of Black people in gold mines. Those working on ACAA have clearly outlined these dates and laws which mark the use of slave labor in California. So this starts with the California Constitution, its first draft in 1849. And it's just very striking, the text and the similarities we see till this day. It says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, unless for the punishment of crime, shall ever be tolerated in the state. This was followed a year later by the 1850 Indian Indentured Act, and it says that any white man who found a native loitering, unemployed, frequently in public spaces, or leading an immoral life could be taken before a judge, and the judge would basically seize them and sell them at a public auction. So these are followed by more laws that fortify slavery in California's history, including the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, California's Slave Act of 1852, and the 1855 Reeser Act in the slave market, which lasted 20 years following 1850. So all of this said, ACA organizers have traced slavery's legacy after the 13th Amendment as well, where chattel slavery was abolished. They have documented how the convict leasing system took hold, which then followed the establishment of chain gangs in California. This has a direct through line to how Black and Brown people continue to be disproportionately incarcerated in California today. So one of the books that I looked in my research that I think was really striking was California, a Slave State. And it has this chapter called Except for Punishment as Crime. And in this chapter, the author, Jean Fazer, details how California in its early statehood embedded incarceration within its root structure and exploited incarcerated workers to essentially build up the state. In the 1850s, California lacked the infrastructure and the funds to construct basic facilities and the systems needed for a state, such as hospitals, schools, and government buildings. So what happened was slave plantation owners, along with a group of merchants and miners who had recently settled in California, came together and created this legislation that basically solved this problem by incarcerating people and forcing them to build up the state's infrastructure. California forced chain gangs of incarcerated workers to build state roads, sewer pipes, sidewalks, government buildings, and even the first prisons that they were held captive in. So the author writes, by propagating the mass incarceration of Native Americans, Black people, immigrants, and poor people, the state of California became a high-density slaveholder and prolific slave broker for the cities, the state, and private farms and factories. Unfortunately, this was just the beginning of mass incarceration in California. So during my work, as I learned from the organizers on this panel, I got to understand how forced labor plays out in California as a very systematic and exploitative system. It has three major components. One, stripping incarcerated workers of their autonomy and their agency over their work. Two, essentially a lack of compensation. I found through my research that the national average wage for an inside worker in the country is 86 cents a day. So this means that the majority of incarcerated workers get less than $1 a day for laboring a full-time job. And then the third point that I learned is that systematic punishment occurs when inside workers try to fight against their enslavement. So to further explain this, Henry told me how the status system works inside California prisons. And so slaves of the state are assigned a card with an identification code and a status. And there are four main statuses, each with a different amount of rights, restrictions, and unfreedom. When someone enters prison, they are automatically assigned A to B status as they await their work assignment. When states place someone in an uncompensated job, basically enslavement, they are assigned A1A status, which is the highest status with the least restrictions. But you aren't compensated for your labor and you're forced into working this job with no choice over that. And then the status with the most punitive and violent treatment is C status or D1D, which is basically solitary confinement because your program time is restricted to such an extreme extent. All of your privileges are stripped, your TV, radio, and other possessions are stolen. And as Henry told me, the CDRC makes it hell for you if you refuse enslavement. So they also restrict the food C-status individuals get from the canteen. So this basically restricts what you can eat if you try and push against your enslavement, which is crazy. The status system is upheld through the Office of Administrative Law, which approves unethical policies because they don't have to pass through the legislature. So this means that CDRC basically governs themselves with minimal outside supervision. One thing I found through my research was Lock and Key, a news service led by inside activists, has calculated how much the state makes from the status system. So this is a quote from an inside organizer. They say, for an A1A prisoner, the CDRC gets $45,000 a year. A prisoner who is programming and is eligible for worker education, but none are available, are classified as A2B. And the CDRC gets $35K a year for A2B prisoners. And then a prisoner who refuses to program or is in ADSEG or the SHU is classified as C status or D1D status. And the CDRC only gets 22K a year for that. And in California, there are over 37 CDRC prisons. The number is, this inside activist said, is exactly unknown because the CDRC makes everything ambiguous and they, purposely hide this information. So I used the statistics that inside activist found, and I calculated that this means that the CDRC makes $4.6 to $9.5 billion a year off of the over 200,000 inside incarcerated people they lock up in over these 37 prisons, which is insane. The yearly cost to run these prisons is roughly $8.5 billion or $65K per person. So when one takes into account the fact that 45 billion taxpayer dollars were funneled into California prisons last year, the CDRC profited between 10.6 and $15.5 billion. One would ask themselves, where is this money going? Into the hands of the CDRC or the state legislator? The honest truth is that it's really hard to find where these profits are going because they purposely make it ambiguous and misleading in their reports. And for this year's budget, there's going to be $18.6 billion for judicial and criminal justice programs. So I would just want to highlight the statistic that was really difficult for the ACA 3 campaign, which was the predecessor to this campaign we're going to be talking about today. The opposition said that it would be too expensive to pay incarcerated workers minimum wage because that would cost $1.5 billion. But as all of the numbers I just said were so much more than $1.5 billion, and you have this $10 to $15 billion profit that nobody knows where it's going, why can't they afford this $1.5 billion? So I wonder what these contracts look like between the California prison industry and these private businesses. Why is the CDRC continuing to ask taxpayers in the state of California for more money each year? And I feel also, while they don't have to publicly disclose this information because technically they're a government agency, I feel if California taxpayers knew this is where all of their money was going and these profits are just mysteriously going back into the CDRC, people would want to know and disclose this information. This sentiment is fully supported by the ABC coalition, who's ramping up their campaign for the following year. I'm going to read a quote to close out my statement. It is imperative that we have all hands on deck as we approach the second year of our 2-year effort to amend California Constitution and finally divorce this state from the practice of slavery and involuntary servitude. Our incarcerated family continues to be forced to labor under the threat and are being exploited on a mass scale only to line the pockets of the filthy rich and powerful. The CDRC and many corporations it does business with are capitalizing off the labor and bodies of our incarcerated loved ones. This is why we formed the Abolition Bondage collectively and helped introduce ACA 8. This measure will ensure that incarcerated people gain the right to consent to any and all labor, as well as reserve the right to withdraw consent without threat or punishment. In order for us to successfully get ACA on the upcoming ballot in November 2024, we must get it passed through 2/3 of the Senate and Assembly concurrence by June 2024. This energy within the movement is alive and pulsing. The ABC, End Slavery Act Coalition, and Abolish Slavery Network are only growing more powerful and are ready to fight the prison industrial complex. But these coalitions still need our support. So that's important that we're having this panel today. And thank you so much for the organizers on the panel who have taught me all of this.
Thank you, Lane. Thank you for reflecting back to us how study is central to organizing. I think this is something that I've really grown from in community with you all, is taking seriously how live, real-time critical analysis of the work we're actually doing is crucial to sustaining our energy so that we don't get demoralized as we hit obstacles, as we, fail. You know what I mean? Like, people are scared of failure. So I appreciate being in community with people who are not afraid of failure and who are interested in doing the kind of an analytical piece as we do our thing. So we understand that failure is actually some of the most important lessons we learn. So thank you for that context, Lee. I want to welcome Geronimo.
How's it going, familia? Hello to the Riverside community. And thank you, Lane, for that extensive and critical analysis. Really appreciate the time and commitment that the students, Professor Dillon, all of you have given to this very important and historic, campaign. And so I wanted to start off, before I get into the kind of nuts and bolts of ACA 8 and even some of the political context going back to ACA 3, with just reminding folks that this fight to end slavery is not new. And it's not something that we can say, even with ACA 3, even though it was, the first constitutional amendment, that it's some kind of new fight that, folks are partaking in. And so I want to read something from the Attica uprising. Some of you might be familiar with the uprising in Attica, prisoners that were fighting and uprising for their rights, incarcerated individuals that were locked up in Attica prison. And so if you read their list of demands, demand number 5 in particular says that, and I'm going to read the quote here: "We demand an end to the persecution and punishment of prisoners who practice the constitutional right of peaceful dissent. Prisoners at Attica and other New York prisons cannot be compelled to work, as these prisons were built for the purpose of housing prisoners, and there is no mention as to the prisoners being required to work on prison jobs in order to remain in the mainline population and or be considered for release. Many prisoners believe their labor power is being exploited in order for the state to increase its economic power and to continue to expand its correctional industries, which are million-dollar complexes, yet do not develop working skills acceptable for employment in the outside society, and which do not pay the prisoner more than an average of 40 cents a day. Most prisoners never make more than 50 cents a day. Prisoners who refuse to work for the outrageous scale or who strike are punished and segregated without the access to the privileges shared by those who work. This is class legislation, class division, and creates hostilities within the prison." I want to continue with demand number 7, which also reads that we demand that industries be allowed to enter institutions and employ inmates to work 8 hours a day and fit into the category of workers for scale wages. The working conditions in prisons do not develop working incentives parallel to the many jobs in the outside society, and a paroled prisoner faces many contradictions of the job that add to his difficulty in adjusting. So I just, I think this underlines the fact that, again, this is nothing new. Our incarcerated folks that have been isolated and removed from society, and a lot of times forgotten, unfortunately, have been fighting this fight for a long time. You know, they've been struggling for a very long time. I also want to remind our late activist Rochelle McGee, who just passed away, and the uprising in the Marin County Courthouse was also something that can be characterized as a slave rebellion. And this is what Rochelle McGee said himself when he helped in that uprising. And so folks have been putting their lives on the line and committing their lives and bodies to liberation and to stop this practice of slavery for many, many decades. And I think that it's just always good to ground ourselves and remind us that, we're continuing that legacy, and not to get too full of ourselves to think that, we're doing something new or innovative, when really we're just trying to finish the work that our ancestors, placed before us. And so with that said, ACA 3 was where we started this fight as far as the last political iteration of it here in California. And ACA 3 was authored by Assemblymember Sidney Comlager, who is now a Congresswoman Comlager in DC. And we ran into a lot of issues with ACA 3. And I would say that we learned a lot of lessons with ACA 3 as well. And so in the process of having ACA 3 go through the legislative process, it eventually died in the Senate. And of all months for it to die, it died in the month of June, which is the month that folks are celebrating Juneteenth, right? Celebrating the legacy of freedom from slavery. But unfortunately, all of us are none, ABC, and all of us that are committed to this fight, we're reminding folks at all the barbecues and cookouts that, we got nothing to celebrate yet. We got work to be done. Our incarcerated family is continuing to be exploited and enslaved in mass scale. And so that's what we did. That's what we did with ACA 3. And unfortunately, it did not pass, but I think that we were able to really bring this fight and this struggle to the mainstream, right? Because for I see that as I do this criminal justice work, that they kind of like to keep us in our own little lane, you know what I mean, in our own little corner, and isolate our work. And it's like, oh yeah, you just got them folk that are trying to do this prison reform stuff. But in reality, this is a human rights issue. This is a humanitarian crisis that we're talking about. This is something that needs to be in the mainstream, and that everybody, whether you've been impacted by incarceration or not, needs to really activate and engage themselves to making sure that we stop this practice. And so, like I mentioned, ACA 3, one of the biggest issues with ACA 3, and as far as the opposition and the way that they were able to kind of stymie our momentum, was an analysis that Sister Lane just outlined a little bit earlier, and that was the Appropriations Committee, which the Appropriations Committee gives a fiscal analysis. They determine what's the economic impact of some legislation, right? And so the economic impact that they wrote as far as the analysis of ACA 3 was that it would cost the state $1.5 billion to pay incarcerated workers minimum wage. Now, the reason why this was such a kind of a out of left field, if you will, is because there's nothing in the constitutional amendment that actually mentions wages. There's nothing in the constitutional amendment that says, hey, after we pass this, workers are going to be getting paid minimum wage, and that's not to say that that's obviously something that we all want. We feel that folks should be honored for their labor, of course, but there's kind of two issues at hand here, and there's kind of a two-pronged approach that we've taken to this fight. And again, we wouldn't have learned this without going through the ACA 3 experience. And what we learned is that as the opposition tries to kind of make both issues about or make the issue all about wages and how much it costs to pay folks inside, what we need to focus on with ACA 8 and what we're doing now is focusing our demands on the right to consent. And so we remind folks that it doesn't cost a penny to give people the right to consent, the right to consent to labor, the right to consent to their bodies, right? That my body is going to be used to make somebody else profit. I should have the right to decide, right, if that's okay or not, if I want to engage in that practice or not, especially when I'm only being paid 8 cents, 16 cents an hour. But even if folks were getting paid minimum wage, if there was still this issue of forced labor, I think that the crux of the issue still wouldn't be addressed, right? And so that's what we're trying to do with ACA 8, is really make sure that we introduce this idea of informed consent. And so another big lesson learned from our experience with ACA 3 was the kind of popular thought was, all right, there's an exception that exists in the Constitution. So I think the way that we handle this, right, the solution is to do what? To just cross out that exception. So then it just says slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited. End of story, right? No exception. We're good to go. Everybody's liberated. We can go on about our days. But unfortunately, as we looked at this thing more critically, we recognized that this system of forced labor has been a beast that's been able to grow now for decades. And as it has, just simply striking out the exception isn't good enough. And we're also seeing that in other states, not only what we learned in ACA 3, but there's been constitutional amendments that have been passed in, some of you might know, in other states. Mainly, I'll bring up Colorado. And Colorado was the first state actually to kind of cross this barrier and finally get a constitutional amendment passed. Unfortunately, though, because their language wasn't strong enough, incarcerated people's material reality has not changed. They're continuing to be enslaved. Forced labor is continuing to happen. Folks are taking it to litigation. They're having, varied success in the courts, but the language itself didn't really divorce the state from being able to use forced labor. And so that's a huge lesson that we learned with ACA 8. And we said, you know what? We're not in this to just pass some symbolic legislation that we can say, hey, we all feel better about the language in our Constitution. We divorced ourselves from some of this bad language, and now we all feel better about ourselves. But we actually, if it's not going to have an impact on the material reality of incarcerated people, then we're not going to support it. And in fact, we might oppose it because it might actually do more damage to the overall movement in the long run than any good. And so with ACA 8, that has been like really the heart of the fight has been us trying to make the language as strong as possible, trying to introduce, again, this idea of informed consent. Incarcerated people deserve the right to give their consent to labor, and should have the right to withdraw that consent. If I'm working, if I decide that I want to work at some point, right, and then I work for 6 months, and then I say, hey, I don't feel like working no more. I don't think that my freedoms and my liberties should be taken from me. I mean, it's just like any of us here on the outside, right? If we decide not to go to work, I mean, there's obviously going to be some repercussions, right? We might not have a job anymore. We might not be able to make that whatever money that they were giving us for that job, but we're not going to get our visits taken away. We're not going to not be able to see our family members, right? We're not going to not be able to go to the store and buy basic necessities that we need to survive. We're not going to be locked into a cell for 23 hours a day. And so when we start thinking about these punishments that they place upon us, that's where we say involuntary servitude is slavery. And so I think that there's something also that we should know about the California Constitution, and it's that the exception actually lies with involuntary servitude. If you read Article 1, Section 6 of the California Constitution, it reads, involuntary servitude is prohibited. Slavery is prohibited. Involuntary servitude is prohibited except for punishment for a crime. So opposition have also used that kind of line of thinking to say, hold on. Slavery has already been abolished. There's no exception to slavery. The exception lies with involuntary servitude. And so if any of you saw All of Us or None and ABC and the work we were doing last June, you've seen us with big banners, putting them on freeways, putting them anywhere that we could put them with high visibility to say involuntary servitude is slavery. It's they try to sell us something that it's not the same thing. It's a lighter version. Anytime that you're forcing somebody to labor and exploit them against their will, it's slavery. And when we look at that 72% of those incarcerated in California are, those of indigenous and African descent, then you could see why this legacy has continued from way back in the day the first iteration of California's Constitution in 1849 had the same exception, and it's continued throughout this, throughout all this time until now. And so ACA 8, where it stands right now, is we were able to clear it through, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this. ACA 8 is the End Slavery in California Act. It's being authored by Assemblymember Lori Wilson, who was chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. She introduced it at the top of 2023. We were able to get it through the Assembly this past, what was it? I can't remember the exact month right now, but we passed it kind of later in the legislative session. But we had a resounding victory in the Assembly. We were able to get every single Democrat to support this bill. Every single one. We had unanimous Democrat support, which is literally unheard of nowadays. And we were able to peel off 6 Republicans and get them to vote on it as well. So we had bipartisan support. It was so historic that those of us that were there in the gallery, they called us down, and we were able to take a video on the Assembly, a picture on the Assembly floor with the legislators and with the author of the bill and with all of the folks that were on the Assembly floor. And so to have, formerly incarcerated folks on the Assembly floor taking pictures with, all of these legislators, it was really something, But at the end of the day, what I looked at it as, and a lot of us as organizers, was this is leverage, man. All of these cats are really recognizing how historic this is, right? They're loving to take the pictures and they're loving to do the PR and, hey, I supported this bill and I support ending slavery, but the work is not done yet. And so when it comes time to really get this thing across the finish line, we hope that those same folks are going to be behind us. When we decide to strengthen the language, right, and make sure that it's not symbolic, we hope that those same legislators stand behind us and support it and make sure that they're not just supporting something symbolic. And we hope that when we get to the voters in November, which I can say, I'm putting it out there that we are going to get to the ballot in November with the strong constitutional amendment, that all of you on this call, all of us in the community, all of us that care about human rights will vote on the right side of history and make sure that we pass this thing, So that's my piece on ACA 8, and I'll be around for any questions.
Hey, thank you, Geronimo. And I want to say something that you touched on, the same thing that I think Lane was reminding us of, which is that slavery takes many forms. Like let's actually look, and I'm talking just in California. I look at the history of slavery in California. It takes many forms. So think about prison slavery and all the contradictions and complexity of that. It's no stretch. It's not an abstraction. We need to actually address it in its fullness. So I want to come back to that last point that you were just making in the discussion for sure. I want to welcome Sean. And Sean's going to bring us actually to some of this things in terms of thinking about what how to analyze and how to think about the violence of prison labor and prison slavery and the violence of prison. Sean, take us away.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank everyone that spoke before me for making my job a lot easier and making my conversation a lot easier. But first, let's retouch on what was spoken about. Henry said it took him a day and a half before he could figure out how to use his ATM card. Lane talked about how mass incarceration and slavery is not new. It actually started before 1800 in the United States of America. And also, she spoke about some verbiage inside of the CDCR's documents. And it said, a prisoner who is programming. So who do we program? Do we program people or do we program something else? A prisoner who is programming. Pay attention to that language. And then Geronimo talked about connecting what's really going on and looking at the deeper implications. This is not a criminal justice issue. This is not a Black and brown issue. This is a human rights issue. So why isn't that spoke about? How come these obvious lenses are not being utilized? So just a few things to think about off of what we've heard thus far. But now let's get into the topic of violence. What is violence? And I know when we think about violence, we think about completely physical harm. But I looked up the definition, the very general definition of violence yesterday, so we can have some clarity once again about these issues. And it says, violence is behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. Physical force. So if you don't work for me, then I'm going to remove you and put you in solitary confinement. If you don't work for me, I'm going to reduce your status. And as I remove you and place you in solitary confinement, as I reduce your status, I then take away your access, which isolates you, can create mental illness, emotional instability, and therefore I can cause you harm. That, my friends, is violence, right? That is violence on another level that is rarely talked about. And once again, that's a question for us to ponder. So now we have to understand what is really going on when you are incarcerated in prison, right? These are the things that are not being discussed, because it is very important that we get these numbers out, right? And it's very important that we have panels to where we can kind of talk about different topics such as this one. But we're so busy as activists and organizers getting the numbers out, there are times that we forget to make the connectivity to the people who are really far from these issues. So today I want to talk about what happens to people like myself, Geronimo, Henry, Fidel, when we are incarcerated. So first, they tell me everything that I can do and that I can't do. And this is every day for year after year after year after year. So when I am released, I don't know how to do anything for myself. Guess what that is? That is a slave. That person is not free. And the reason I don't know how to do anything for myself, because it is 2022, 2023, and I'm still busy washing dishes and pushing brooms. So then when I come out here and I go to a reentry program, I talk to somebody who believes they are my ally. And what do? They place me into a job that all I can do is labor. And who does labor? A labor force, a working class, and slaves. That's who does labor, especially in 2022 and 2023. They have something called artificial intelligence, and it seems to be a pretty serious issue to me. But that's a different conversation. Now, hold on. We're not done. Right now, they have this famous quote. It's in every book. It's in every speech. Hurt people, hurt people. So now I'm surrounded by hurt people who hurt people. Myself, I'm also hurt, so I may hurt people too. I'm in there and I'm working out every day. I'm mad. My mental cognition is low because I have no mental stimulation, because I'm being forced to work and not rehabilitate or figure out my trauma or any other things that I may need to do from my personal experience. But guess what I know how to do? I know how to use my hands. That's what I know how to do, because that's what they made me do. So now, once again, when I am released, my hands may have been good in prison. You know, I could have got me a cup of noodles that's going to make me have a heart attack or diabetes or honey buns, and, you know, in 20 years from now. But I also know how to, you know, throw a left hook or throw a right jab and get somebody off of me. But those things are not useful out here in the free world. But guess what? Me using my hands are, because what does that do? It resigns me to a working, lower class individual. So this is where the topic of abolition and the other things come up. Is, well, why do we need an individual such as myself? Why is that? Who benefits? It's not me. It's not my community. It's not my family. These are questions that we all can understand who haven't had the experience of incarceration and slavery. But hold up. Slavery's been going around since before 1900. So slavery is real. And why is slavery here? It's called economics, right? Without slavery, somebody else is not rich. We have to be okay with the fact that United States of America has gotten rich off of slavery and free labor. And one thing that we know about money is when you're making money, you want more money. There are new things to buy. There are more things to do. We have more family members to take care of. So if I've been making money and my family's been making money for year after year after year, why would I stop making money? It doesn't make sense when you tie these things to capitalism and economics. But once again, that's a different conversation, not today. Today, we're talking about the impact of slavery and how slavery inside prisons affect us all outside of prisons. Because the people who are enslaved in prison and they come out to still be enslaved, those are the people who are your neighbors. So if you're not connected to incarceration, you are connected to incarceration, because incarceration is real, especially in the United States of America. And we all know the stats, so we're not going to go to the 2.3 million and the 1 in 3s and the 1 in 17s. We know those issues because most people on this call are highly educated in one way or another. And as I segue, let's go fast forward to a lot of work that I do on a national level, the 1994 crime bill. Now, if we know that slavery and mass incarceration started before 1900, in 1994 through 1998, an extra $30.2 billion in federal funding was allotted to different states to lock up more people for more time. And they called these laws truth in sentencing laws. So let's say I think in California it was 50%. You would do 50% of your time. The programming was different, right? Here we go. I'm even using the word. Listen to me, a product. So the lessons was different, right? However, after those truth in sentencing laws, the federal government said, you know what? Let's create better slaves. And we will pay you millions of dollars as a state to make sure everyone stays incarcerated for 85% of their time. So what happens? They get richer, we get poor, and slavery remains economic empowerment for a certain group of people. But once again, that's not the conversation for today. The conversation is to connect the lasting impacts of slavery, whether incarceration or not incarcerated. Slavery is wrong. And if you don't think slavery is wrong, then you need to pay attention and increase your critical analysis of what's going on in the media. Now, earlier today, Dylan said they have been dehumanizing us and demoralizing us. And if they're dehumanizing us and demoralizing us and making money off of us, so you don't see us as human, it's easy to make us a product. Now, once again, this is a cell phone. This cell phone makes my life easier. I can call Geronimo and not have to fly to Sacramento. That's what products do. Products makes our life easier. Think about that. Before they demonize me, write terrible articles, and make you scared of me, remember, before I was born, they wanted me to be a product. They wanted most people on this call to be a product. Think about these things when you talk about slavery and when you understand what incarceration really is and how does it really impact the community. Because now the numbers are here. We don't need to quantify it on a college Zoom. We know that incarceration does not make communities safer. There are preemptive measures that make us safer, but guess what? They do not want the money coming into our communities. And I will say that boldly, and we can talk about that off of this Zoom meeting if we want to discuss that. And last but not least, because I don't want to take too much time, in the class, we had the pleasure of meeting with Dylan's students for a few weeks. And the people that I work with, we did a few interviews. In the interviews that we did, these were young men who were incarcerated, I think over five years at least. None of these men were over 30 years old. And once again, these men had difficulties finding jobs, using Zoom meetings, writing emails, the basic skill sets to operate in today's marketplace. So when you don't have a basic skill set, that leads you to exploitation. And how can we stand here as a community? How can we stand here as a supposedly nation and citizens? And we know for sure that incarceration, economic empowerment, and slavery has been the mainstay in this country for a long time. And it was sad to hear the stories, but it was wonderful to open up and awake young minds into what is really happening here in America. And I think I'll leave with that. I don't want to take too much time. I just wanted to start the conversation and give us some things to think about beyond the numbers, because this is happening to people. And I don't want to live in a place or exist in a world where people become products. But if we don't support ACA 8, that's what we're saying, and we're okay with it. Thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, Sean. We're going to come back to this concept of people as products. I'm actually going to maybe try to stoke our conversation after Bobby and Fidel speak. Bobby, I'm going to pass you the mic. You're up.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you, Dylan, for allowing us to have a deeper dive into involuntary servitude, because research is always necessary, because they have their research, and so we should have ours as well. And so just thank you for that opportunity. I just want to lift up the students I've worked with. Thank you guys so much for listening and doing the things I asked of, and just being open to say, like, I don't know how to do this, or how can I do that? So just thank you for, letting me have some space with y'all. So what we talked about in ours was the repercussions of the impacts of labor inside, and the rehabilitation program, the staff, and the budgets, right? We wanted to know the other states that passed involuntary servitude was Vermont, Colorado, Alabama, Utah. Like Geronimo said, it's just saying that they don't condone slavery anymore, but they're still doing it. So I had them, call some of the supporters, some of the community-based organizations. So if we have to have a national campaign, right, we have some allies to go to add to our roster as we do this work. We found out that there was really no change, right? And they were all on it for the pictures of the PR. But the people inside the jails, there was an article by Ivan Kilgore in the All of Us Are None paper back in February, December. And I believe, Lainey, thank you for putting it in there. And so I let the people who I was working with read, right? And so we came up with a few things that we asked community-based organizations to, start making relationships, looking at the policies, right? Maybe we can start changing the policies within the inside for the prisoners in there. Like, we might have to go sit with wardens and do things. So, I charge the community-based organizations that do the civic engagement work to step up, make those things connect, like Henry was talking about earlier. But just moving along, 29% of the people that are in the jails don't have children, but the rest of them do. And if they were to be able to pay a livable wage, they could probably still take care of their kids. Like Sharp said, there's no transfer value, right? You can be cutting everybody's hair in there, and when you get out, you still need to pay Marinello $5,000, uh, knowing that our kids are affected by this involuntary servitude that's going on with the prisons, all that money Laney talked about, there shouldn't be a reason for all this red tape to get welfare to take care of your children. There shouldn't be no reason why a child that is missing the father is still going without, because the mom or the father that is in these jails are working. You know, they should reap some of the benefit. They should have at least a minimum wage. You know, we don't even have a minimum wage, but you know, they should have it too. And knowing that it's a perpetual system because of the racist structural systems that America is based on. Me as a black person, or just me as a black person, they're going to find a way to capture me because, like Sean said, I was a product before I was even born. They already wanted. And with the prison population being mostly made of African Americans and Hispanic, brown people, lately they've been locking up their own, right? Because they're seeing a lot of black and brown people are rising above and, you know, really watching their step as they navigate this world, especially out here in California. Like Henry, yes, I'm glad you left LA, right? Oh, right. So, nevertheless, family is vital to society, and if they've already got us in a position where we're going to go to them regardless, then they should be more transparent and they should really help rehabilitate. Well, I think they took the R off of CDR now, so they don't have to rehabilitate no more. Rehabilitation is off, and a program is the thing. I looked at an article, and they were saying the prisoners inside were going on, you know, doing riots or doing strikes or hunger strikes because they did not want to do the work. And like they said, the repercussions of that work, you know, solid, you know, no visitations, no phone calls, no commissary. And so I, you know, challenged one of my research students to write Kevin, to write Ivan Kilgore, and to let him know that today we'll be lifting him up, and we'll be asking that all community-based organizations that engage in civic work go the extra mile, and to ask that funders give us money so we can do this work. Because see, we can't be on the front line all day and then come home and worry about how we're going to pay our bills, right? And like, this is nothing new we're doing. Like Geronimo said, this is something that we're continuous trying to do. But nowadays, there's dollars, all that money Laney talked about, all that philanthropist money that is out here with these funders. If you support it with your money, because we need money to make sure that these policies, these laws, these meetings reflect the better interests of our fellow inmates, our fellow incarcerated people, so they can come home with skills that they learned in there. There's no reason why a lady's hands are looking old because she know how to do construction. She's been doing construction for 80 years. That's just, you know, come on. And then none of these things are transferred, you know, and shout out to the, you know, the wildfire people out here for, you know, trying to break through. Thank you for giving us a small blueprint, but there's still a lot of work to do there too as well. And I just want to let y'all know that family is vital to society once again. And if you are Black, brown, please take care of yourself, because you'll end up working for 11 cents an hour. When I was incarcerated out here in Banning, in Banning, they had me working. I was making sheriff posters, bookmarkers. That's why I know how to do a lot of things, right? Because I knew I was an indigent and I didn't want to take from my parents while I was incarcerated, and my children were in the system at the time. And when I got home, only thing I could do was just call 211 and say, they got my kids, what do I need to do? And then, you know, I was blessed with a lawyer that, you know, had some compassion and really took the time to help me understand and I was able to get my kids back, which, now I just was recently helping families navigate. And there's a lot of formerly incarcerated people who have done a lot of time, want to get out, look for their kids, and they've been lost in the system, or they're back in the system in another jail or another state because they've been moved to a different county. So I just want to say before I get off the line that, hey, if you care, so much more will be done, but you need to care first. So I just challenge y'all to care, the philanthropists, the community-based organizations, the organizers, the allies, the white allies, the allies are so important to this work because you guys are going to help us spread the word. And when the letter comes back, from Ivan, hopefully he can share the word inside the jails. I'm going to give it back over to you, Dylan.
Thank you for that, Bobby. Thank you for that. I want to come back to your analysis of the child welfare, so-called child welfare system. I'm gonna put some resources in the chat as well so people can take a look at some of this, because part of the spread of abolitionist organizing has I think, thankfully started to address the child welfare apparatus as an direct extension of policing, in fact, as a historical extension of slavery. So I think that the connections you're drawing here are really crucial. Thank you for doing that. Fidel's going to close us out with the opening comments, and then we'll go into a discussion after that. So I want to welcome Fidel. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. Yeah, well, I heard a lot of powerful information, a lot of correlations that we were able to connect among different panelists with their critical analysis. Has been very insightful to hear all these connections that we're able to connect with, especially the fact that us folks that have been directly impacted by these practices, like Sean mentioned, human rights, that really resonated, because when I'm thinking about it, right, I took some notes and it said the right to consent. So when folks do get incarcerated, we are given work assignments, and then with that, we get time reductions and things like that. And I was thinking about that. Because I was like, okay, well, what is coercion? Coercion, the practice of persuading someone using force or threat. So when we're talking about ending involuntary servitude, right? How many of us that have been directly impacted have been persuaded into these job assignments to work for these fees, whether it's 11 cents, 8 cents. I think I worked for 8 cents. Just so that way we could get some forms of time off. Now, does that sound like a human rights issue? I mean, really, think about it. We were coerced into accepting these terms and conditions. So when we're talking about ending involuntary servitude, it's so many different factors that contribute to this, such as when Sean was mentioning about the 1994, as well as the 1994 crime bill, how everything started getting established and continuing and ramping up to lead to mass incarceration. So the thing is when we were doing this research, right, what were the shortcomings, right? Well, for Oregon, they operate, 14 states have prisons. They have 14 state prisons under the Oregon Department of Corrections. They had Measure 112. Some of their facilities rely on hospitals because people incarcerated do their laundry. And then we had Vermont. Vermont also has multiple different agencies that are connected with profiting off of their facilities as well. And then we have Tennessee, These are some of the states that got rid of ending involuntary servitude in their constitution. But what we found out when we were able to get in contact with folks from these other states, we asked, so what changes have been made? Did everybody stop working? Did everything shut down? Because those were some of the things that California was mentioning. Everybody was going to stop working. What are we going to do? The thing is everything still continued in these other states. Everything continued to function. Everybody continued to continue working. And it didn't stop, because the thing is people are still getting paid 8 cents, 11 cents, 12 cents, 30 cents. So we were able to get in contact with the Oregon Justice Resource Center. And one of the gentlemen that I was able to speak with provided some really valid information. He mentioned all it did was removed it from the Constitution. The thing about it is, the way our folks are getting compensated is what we need to focus on. We need to focus on the language. I think that's what Geronimo was mentioning about the language, about the way our folks get paid, the way the way that we're getting compensated for work. So this gentleman mentioned that it was Oregon, actually. They mentioned that they were going to go, they're creating a bill right now to change that language. The thing about California, we are already working on that instantaneously, as well as taking any involuntary servitude out of the Constitution. So we're kind of like, we were already kind of thinking about that, having these conversations, but that just added additional insight into what needs to be done when we're focusing on the shortcomings, policy forms, policy ideas, policy concepts. So there's so many different corporations and businesses that are profiting off of this. The thing about it is we need to follow the money, and we need to figure out how we're going to change that language when it comes to our folks being compensated. So then that way we could continue to removing these injustices of human rights issues that continue to affect our people.
Thank you, Fidel. I'm gonna spotlight everybody now so we can start our discussion. Folks that are here in attendance, please feel free to start thinking about any questions or thoughts that you want to share with everybody. We have about 30 minutes left with our folks here, with our good folks here. So I want to take full advantage of that. And let me start by raising a couple questions. And Sonia, I'll get to you first. I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question. I'm going to come to Sonia next. Thank you, Sonia. I won't forget. And it comes from just reflecting on what you all have said in the kind of the fullness of what everybody has said today, which is to think about how this is about really so much more than the very narrow issue of prison labor or prison slave labor. It's about so much more than a specific clause, exception clause in the U.S. Constitution or the California Constitution. And as y'all have already said, it's about so much more than what may or may not happen if that exception clause in the California Constitution is actually eliminated. And of course, let's keep in mind as well, right? Like you can eliminate it in the California Constitution, it's still in the U.S. Constitution, right? That's the 13th Amendment. Although I will also say that as much as folks have focused on that, there are some serious flaws with the analysis that's been put out in that famous Netflix documentary film 13th. So like that's topic for a different roundtable. But to say that y'all have brought some things up here that I wanted to bring forward in kind of the first part of our discussion. So as I hear you all, the forms of violence that surround prison slave labor go way beyond prison jobs. And what I think this tells us, and again, I'm drawing from what I think Lane and Henry started us off with, the violence of slavery is different from the violence of prison slave labor. What I mean by this is that California can eliminate prison slave labor. It won't eliminate the violence of prison. In other words, you can get rid of that. You can get rid of prison slave labor. You are not going to get rid of the violence of prison. I mean, Sean's the one that raised it, and Professor Nunley in the chat already emphasized it. The people held captive by the state are the product. Right? So whether or not the people being held captive are making products or producing furniture and license plates or working for a private corporation, which very rarely happens, whether or not that's happening, captive people are the product. So the violence of slavery is the prison. It's not just prison labor, it is the prison. Prison labor is the tip of the iceberg, which is part of why I think to think about Attica, to think about the long legacies of Attica. Shout out to Ori Burton, who wrote the published the book Tip of the Spear. This is why I think in the 21st century, just in the last 23 years, when we observe and support prison strikes, they're often not just about withdrawing labor, right? I think probably the majority of the time, prison strikes are not about withdrawing prison labor. They're usually taking the form of hunger strikes, or they're taking the form of other forms of withdrawing from business as usual or compliance, submission, obedience as usual to expose the violence of the prison, not just the prison labor. So, okay, this is my question then. Thank you for letting me have that preface. My question is this for y'all, to kick things off. What else can be done? What else must be done beyond state reform focused change, beyond policy-centered change, if we're already identifying the potential limitations and failures of policy change to getting rid of, to abolishing the violence of prison, which is really about abolishing the prison. So what can and must be done beyond this work on ACA 8, and how can the work around ACA 8 help facilitate that other work rather than cut it off, right? Or rather than kind of funnel people into just kind of state-focused, legislature-focused stuff. I know it's a complicated question that we could talk about all day. I'm hoping we can get like at least a couple thoughts on that to share with the people that are here and that are watching the recording. And then Sonia, I promise I'll get to your question right away after this. So anybody can just feel free to unmute and jump in.
Well, like I said, we need to have more relationships with these wardens. So, and we need to look at these policies. We need to challenge some of these policies as far as the Child Protective Services. The Adoption State Family Act needs to be set down. The money needs to be, the money that is being made, if it goes up, some of that money needs to be diverted to the children that are of these inmates. Philanthropists need to give community-based organizations more money to do civic engagement, to allow these people to know that somebody is fighting for them. And we need to have more research groups. We need to have unity amongst organizers and community organizations so we can get the message across without it being so bipartisan, or we only can do because that grant says this and that. We need to, like Geronimo said, it will not, the ballot box, the California legislature, we won't see the changes, right? And the changes are within us. While we're out here, we probably need to, if we can't get them to abolish, continue to help have community organizations abolish the exception clause from the California Constitution, work and research will continue to help the efforts to decarcerate. So,
thanks, Bobby. Go ahead, Henry.
I know I'm a little rusty. You now know I ain't good work.
Jump in, Bob. Sorry, jump in, Henry.
Yes, just real quick, so we can pass it to Sonia. I would say we're doing already. We're initiating the process, which is showing up. I definitely encouraging our not just our chapters, but our different partners, the different people that all system impact that have been hurt by all these tough on crime bills, 3 strikes, and high strict laws that have destroyed us to come and unite and research. So, I mean, we found a lot of information in just a few sessions on this quarter with the intern students. And this is just the first round, So, eventually we're going to have to go to the streets and go get people to sign on this bill. We're going to have to do some phone banking, people in different counties and across California to inform the people like, hey, this is at the core governing factor of what they're doing to our children, presenting some of these research points and to talking points just to inform the people to get more involved, going to the colleges, educating people, going inside the prisons, and informing the people and making them aware of what's happening to them, because a lot of us, we were angry and we didn't know why we were so angry. We're angry because we're getting railroaded and we have no constitutional rights, and we have no, we're just not being respected. And lastly, I would say we have to start partnering up about who are our legal service provider organizations, and learn more of these models of knowing your rights, knowing your constitutional rights when you get pulled over, what to do, right? Educating people from how to file grievances when they're inside there, and and how to file complaints, motions for resentencing that implement the laws that we're passing. But just creating soldiers all well-rounded and organizing and just caring and even just having a conversation with your neighbor about this topic, so that we can get people to start caring more about voting, believing more about voting, and engaging more in not just policy advocacy, but community, grassroots, systemic organizing, and all these systems that are affecting our well-being every day.
Thank you, Henry. I'm going to close out this first round with Sean, and then I'm going to jump into the questions from Sonia and Beyond the Interfaith. Go ahead, Sean.
Okay, this is a huge question, and it's centered around a lot of the national work that I do. First, as activists, we have to understand that the power of the machine, right? And we have to ask ourselves the hard question is, what if this never ends? What would we do? How would we as activists and community members, how would we approach this problem? And as we have 400 years of data, we need to aggregate that data and come up with alternative solutions, right? But there are a large group of people who understand and that are losing faith in the processes that we are still supporting. However, it is very important that we understand guerrilla warfare, right? And we have to all sit at the table as activists and influencers to where under no circumstances will I sell out another activist. I will stop playing this divide and conquer narrative, right? Good activists versus bad activists. I understand the tools of war in my opponent, and we seek to abolish the opponent and the institutions.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lane.
One thing in terms of like the question about policy that you raised that I thought was interesting, that I learned this semester, is someone told me that you're constantly, as an organizer, working in 3 dimensions: one against the system, one inside the system, and one outside of the system. And I think All of Us or None does a really great job of capsulating that, because you're both have a policy angle, you have a collective action angle, you have an angle where you're highlighting the voices and have a network inside. And so I think that's really crucial, especially like considering just the local level, right, of Riverside, all of us or none, you have, you know, constant engagement with the community. And I think that's really important. And I think something that recently happened, which is a win, is that the Riverside County decided to have a study about if they should separate the sheriff's department from the coroner's office. And that's really important if that does happen. And that was a unanimous vote, which, you know, never happens. And so I think just constantly doing those three dimensions is really important.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate y'all's thoughtful responses to this. And I'm just want to say that I think more of us need to be committed to sustaining these discussions so that we're not always stuck in casualty management. And honestly, death management, because this corner thing that you just raised, Lane, it's so important that there's that modest victory to separate. Because by the way, folks, this is something I followed the lead of my comrades in All of Us or None and ACLU and some other organizations. But you know, Riverside Sheriff's Department has been known to essentially oversee so many jail deaths of people who have not been convicted of anything. Like something like 70+% of people in Riverside County jails have not been convicted of anything. They just can't afford bail. And they die. They're dead. I mean, I feel like the state is essentially, the sheriff's department is essentially overseeing their deaths. I don't want to say they killed them because they'll probably come out here and sue me, but there's a part of me that wants to say that. All right, now I didn't say that, but a part of me wants to say that. And so what I'm saying is that we're having to respond to that all the time. Yeah, thank you, Sean. Sean just put in the chat somebody just died in the last 2 days. I mean, this is constantly happening. So I'm committed to working alongside y'all and everyone else that's here and watching the video, try to figure out how we can push back against this constant position that we're in, which is just kind of managing the violence, right? Managing the casualties, managing the death. Enough of me. Sonia, do you want to unmute and say something here?
Hi, thank you. No, I just had a couple of clarifying questions, I guess, in a sense. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good. You're sounding good.
Okay, so I have new AirPods, and I wasn't sure they was working. Some of the questions that I have when we talk about volunteering slavery is since they're getting paid, even if it's 8 cents or up to 50 cents, are they still considering that slavery? Because, you know, usually slavery is you work for nothing other than room and board, or, you know. So is that been addressed, or is that even came off as a concern at all?
Thank you, Sonia. That's an important question. Like, I guess it's part of that whole technicality of slave labor or not slave labor. Is being paid pennies an hour. Does it still count as slave labor? Like, has this come up in what you all have seen with the interactions with lawmakers, legislators, and even folks outside the legislature, ordinary folks?
Yeah. If I could handle that,
Yeah,
I think that it comes down to, again, what we were talking about earlier about them trying to make it about wages, this issue of slavery, making it about wages, and this is all about folks just trying to get they're just trying to get paid, and they're just trying to get money and all of this stuff, when really what we're talking about again is consent. It's about having the right to decide and not be forced into labor. And so those of you that know about incarceration, when you get incarcerated, you get assigned work assignments. You don't have the choice to decide. Yeah, there's some that are voluntary, but the vast majority of them are not. And so that's what we're talking about with this issue, is that folks are forced into labor. They don't have any right to consent. And that is not, that to me is definitely slavery.
Right. Yeah. Just to highlight that point, right? It's non-consensual. The labor is non-consensual. Does that make sense, Sonia?
Yeah, it does. And so I totally get that part. And then another thing that came to mind while, and I just probably while Fidel was speaking. Hey, Fidel. And we talk about the wages, and you know, and I think it's a good thing to, you know, have some type of wages, even if it's the minimum wage. And I know Bobby mentioned about family to help, you know, the families, and you know, not being a burden on the families, and then also a part of, you know, paying off their restitution before they, you know, get out. But I guess one of the things that came on my mind is preparing a narrative for those who's not incarcerated or been system impacted, how they might come against that, saying, oh, now you're going to be taking jobs from us. And we haven't committed a crime. Now should you receive same wages, a minimum wage, and our tax dollars are already housing you and feeding you and paying for your medical expenses. Just, I guess that we have to be prepared to create a narrative, a counter narrative for that if it came up. And that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you. Anyone want to take that on before we move to the next question?
I could try on that one.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing, Sonia, is possibly think about what the opposition may be, right? And one of the oppositions that you are able to identify by listening is that, well, what if they're taking jobs from us? People incarcerated are taking jobs from us, right? I think there's always going to be oppositional points of views of a variety of different things, but that's not only what people that are incarcerated. That's it's now, like with everything, like whether it's different folks within our communities taking jobs from us, and people saying those things they're taking jobs from us, but in reality, from the work that we do, we already know those are tactics. Those are tactics that are always going to be used, no matter what the case may be or the situation.
Yes, you're correct. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Sonia.
One second, Dylan.
Go ahead, Sean. Go ahead.
I couldn't find it, and that's a great question because it's already being used against the movement, and it's a chart, and it goes into the research done about crimes and violent crimes, because we know that the huge narrative is that we're all monsters and we're all criminals. So from now until in 1970, the same amount of violent crimes were committed, I think, up until like 2018 or 2019, right? What has expanded was the non-violent crimes. And while I hate to use the argument versus violent or non-violent, that gives clarity into what's really going on. It's that there is a lot of rhetoric and emotionally charged language that's creating confusion. And you're right, there needs to be a clearer narrative and presentation on what's really going on. As far as, unless you've been incarcerated, you may not even understand the term wobbler, right? So a wobbler is a term that gives a judge full discretion to make your charge non-violent to violent. So even now, the people that are incarcerated under violent crimes, a large percent of those people said, well, the judge said your case could have been violent, so I'm going to give you the felony side of the wobbler when I could have gave you the misdemeanor side. And then if we do the research even more, we'll see that wobblers are disproportionately administered to people of color, right? And that will be a great way to segue and to create some presentations and points for opposition. So I really appreciate you, and thank you, Sonia, for bringing up that topic.
Thank you for that. That's an important political education, this notion of a wobbler. I'm going to try to get to our last two folks here that have questions. Ipiani, Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. Come on off mute and feel free to share.
Definitely. First of all, I just want to say thank you for compiling an amazing panel of wonderful organizers that are making change in our community. I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. I work with the CURB Coalition, Californians United for Responsible Budgeting. I'm pretty sure everyone's aware, but we're in the midst of constructing a prison closure campaign. And one of the aspects that I'm responsible for with others as well is base building. So I was just wondering if anyone could provide any unique insights or creative ways to base build, and knowing that we're small in numbers, and maybe ways of utilizing AI or utilizing the tools at our disposal to garner community support for a closure of a state facility.
Appreciate that. Yeah, skill building, methodological insight, tactical insight. Thank you for raising that. Go ahead, Henry. I see your hand up.
You know, brother, first of all, big shout out to you and all the team over there. We love you guys. You know, and we do plan, I know for all of us in Sacramento and our LSPC team, as we talked about it, we do plan to support y'all in the prison closures and those campaigns, because that is next, right? There's so many things attached to this, right? Like the brother was just talking about an issue about a Racial Justice Act issue, which you just mentioned, Sean. There's a racial justice issue based on that data, but we'll put that to the side for another organizing topic, right? But just want to make note of that. And what you're mentioning is how to power base. I remember when COVID hit, there was a lot of families organizing, and we went to the prisons and stuff, and went right outside. And I know one time we went to advocate for Rashad McGee before he was going to go to board. He was already reaching on 58 or 59 years incarcerated, and one of our guys got arrested and targeted, and we right away put a legal team, and got him out in a week. You know what I'm saying? So having legal support, having the families, having the other coalition partners like you showing up right here, you already want some supporters right here. You know, AI can't handle this kind of relationship building. You know, our relationship building relies on our commitment and our determination to care, to show up. You know, I got Librado right here, you know, over there in Long Beach. He was a 3-striker. He's showing up, even struggling with work and hours. And like, you know, people, it's a struggle sometimes Evan is talking about, you know, we need to get more funding so we can hire more organizers, because we know the solutions. We know how to change this dynamic and throw that whole table upside down and reconstruct that whole that whole thing from the floor up. Let me not cuss, because I like to cuss sometimes when I speak with passion. But I would say, brother, just showing up, engaging in coalitions. You know, we got the Family Unity Coalition presenting there. We got our All of Us and Unchapter meetings in different areas, going to the Riverside. College, since you're down there, I'd like to connect with Librado Clemena. He's a mover and a shaker. You could probably go to the Criminals and Gangs Anonymous groups, as he does a lot of meetings out there, and he's a co-founding member. Like, we have a big network. We got the professor right here. We could get you to engage about that campaign, and we'll show up and do a whole other panel like this on how we can support, how we can organize, and what has been done so far. So any support, bro, I'm going to be the first one to drop my email. Just holler, brother. We're in this movement together.
Peace. Thank you for that, Henry. Anyone else want to address the issue of base building? I mean, I think one of the formats that you can do it in is collective study, which is exactly what this is, and inciting some critical conversations, some debate, like exchanging ideas, thinking critically about the work we're doing. Honestly, I think that's how you base build, because then people feel like they're being pulled into something that's dynamic and that's collective, rather than just a formula. You know, rather than did you want to say something, Fidel, and then Bobby, I'll get to you next.
Ipiani, you're already doing it. First of all, you're already doing it because you've been showing up everywhere. You're always our meetings. You're always connecting, so you're already establishing it. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time, but you're doing exactly what's expected, and that's exactly how you base build, is it by what you've been doing already. Because by you showing up, then we're able to introduce you to other folks that are doing the work as well. Then we introduce you to other folks, and then it just starts accumulating. And then as you stay consistent with the relationships, that's what builds that base building, because they know you stay consistent with things.
And I just want to say, Iviani, reach out to Stephanie Jeffco. All of us are not in Orange County. She created a document like a year, maybe 3-4 years ago, about base building. Right, and that's been very helpful as I've been doing my work over the years. And I wanted to say, Dylan, Riverside County is something else. Our sheriff makes $30 million off the free labor here. They already get most of the general relief fund. It's just crazy, right? And so I'm glad that hopefully that they're going to get it separated, and that they start to ship up in the sheriff's department, because they don't want us to get rid of it for some reason. I don't know why, but because they want free labor, so they're never gonna get rid of it. Well, that's all.
Right on. Oriana, why don't you come on live and raise your point? Well, you can kind of help us close it out.
Hi guys. I just want to say thank you, everybody. It's been so amazing to be in this space. I'm actually in Florida, and I have a friend on the inside, and so he's not necessarily an activist, and I myself am not an organizer yet, but I do want to get more involved. I really appreciate what y'all are saying about the kind of three-headed like sort of approach to this. I have been looking for the past like several years for organizations here in Florida. There's just so much suppression of information here. So I guess I have a couple of questions for you guys. Just this week, I was reading about the Alabama prison strikers. I know the article's from back in November, but I just found the article from Truth Out this week. So I wasn't sure if any of y'all had any thoughts on what's going on there, as well as like how to get involved here in Florida, and if there's any explicitly abolitionist organizations, because there's a great organization, Florida Cares, that's definitely not abolitionist, and they work kind of with the DOC and within the system, and so it's good to be in that space so that I know what's going on and what they're doing, but I'm definitely looking for something a little bit more like direct action and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you guys for anything y'all can share on that. Thank you.
Who wants to jump in? And then I put a couple, I think there's a couple of resources just popped up on in the chat, Ariana. Florida Prisoner Solidarity and then Dream Defenders.
Yes, thank you. I have heard of them, so I will do a little bit more research into that as well.
I will also say too that sometimes when there's no movement, you have to create a movement, and that's what I found here in Sacramento. We had to create many sub-movements, and there's now big inner working movements maintaining themselves, right? And you know, if you ever want to build a chapter out there in your area, you know, all you got to have is 10 formerly incarcerated people willing to start engaging. You know, you go to the targeted areas where people are at and educate them. And once you got a buy-in, we'll connect you with Oscar at prisonerswithchildren.org, Oscar at prisonerswithchildren.org, or you can email me and Jeronimo, and we could connect you to potentially start a chapter up there. As you know, we're forced to create movements. Unfortunately, if we don't create movements, we will not be left in peace. It'll impact our kids, our grandkids. It's like we get no rest from these systems. This is some real serious business. It's purposely targeted to keep us down, keep that knee on our neck, and that's why we have to fight this oppression with our rights, with the law, and with legislation, and with movement. So any support on that, the information is on the thread.
Right on. Anyone with the last comment before I take us
just thank you to everyone for participating and showing up. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, real quick, just to announce that we're gonna be having some board going up probably January, February. I'll follow up with you, Dylan, and you can be updated once they start. Once we get a hard date on when they're going up. But we're gonna be having billboards going up that are having quotes from our incarcerated members on this issue with slavery and involuntary servitude, supporting ACA 8 and all that. So there's gonna be some billboards all across California, and yeah, we'll keep you posted.
This is excellent. Hey, I want to express my love for you all for leading this discussion today. And I want to express my love to the people that came through and that are watching this video. And I hope that this can contribute to some critical discussion because I think we touched on some crucial points that sometimes don't get tossed around enough, which is, you know, we're focused on trying to shift what the state does, trying to shift state policy at the same time that so much of what we're talking about is so far past anything that the state will do. Because it's embedded in the state, right? Like so much of the stuff that y'all talked about is hardwired into what the state is and what it does, what prisons are and what prisons do. So that's the path. The path, I think, is necessarily an abolitionist one in the sense of destroying destroying the prison apparatus. There's no other option if we're going to be serious about the principles that I think we generally agree on, right? We're not just about trying to stop prison labor, we're trying to stop this asymmetrical warfare that we need to have a guerrilla strategy to deal with, right, Sean? I mean, this is so crucial to think about 100%. In a serious way.
I'd like to add one thing before we head out, Dylan, because I know we're wrapping it up. We always like to head out with the chance that we always do. So if everybody, whenever we are ready to head out, can you let me know? Are we ready to head out now? Or
yeah, lead us.
Okay. So if everybody could come off the mic, and I'm gonna say all of us, and then you all will say our none, and then I'm gonna say all of us, and then you all will say our none. Are you ready? All of us.
Or none.
All of us.
Or none.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming today.